may in all of us have peace. Today, everybody in the room is 100% Irish. As we celebrate our traditions and origins, and we acknowledge the contributions of our Lyons family in this state and country, we Lyonses must have had a specific beginning at a specific place and time. And there must have been a beginning for Ireland. There must have been someone who arrived first, who walked along the Irish shores. And I discovered a 12th century tradition that says it was a woman who first saw the fertile fruited mountains, the fruitful misted woods, the moist overflowing lochs, and the flowing hillside springs. And the woman was none other than the granddaughter of Noah. Her name was Caesara, a lady of classic beauty and intelligence. This is a written account by Gerald of Wales, who visited Ireland in the year 1183. And he wrote in his diary that according to most ancient histories of the Irish, Caesara, the granddaughter of Noah, hearing that the flood was about to take place, decided to flee in a boat with her companions to the farthest islands of the west where no man had yet ever lived. She hoped that the vengeance of the flood would not reach the place where sin had never yet been committed. However, all the ships of her company were wrecked, and her ship alone, carrying 3 men and 50 women, survived, and had put in at the Irish coast by chance 1 year before the flood, and they were all saved. But I discovered another tradition which says the Irish are in fact one of the lost tribes of Israel. In the book of Genesis 16 verses 1 to 16 records that Abraham was 86 years of age when his surrogate wife Hagar bore him a son, Ishmael. But when Sarah, Abraham's wife, later bore him a son named Isaac, Ishmael and his mother were driven out, and he made his home, the Bible says, as a wild ass of a man in the wilderness, and tradition says on that isle of splendid isolation across the Irish Sea. Now you can pick whichever tradition best supports your expectations of our family. But personally, I think Ishmael, in fact, was a stowaway on Noah's granddaughter's ship. And he and Caesara fell in love, giving birth to the Irish race and the Lyons family. And that is why the Lyonses and everyone in this room are not only a beautiful and smart people, but some are a bit on the wild side. Well, such visions of the distant past are best left where they were, obscure in the fog of too much time, where the Irish character and our own were formed, and some of those characters will shortly be heard from this afternoon. Well, we may not know exactly when the Irish began, but we do know precisely when we began in this country. You know our story that Jeremiah and Ellen came from Waterford in the 1840s to New York via Boston, and they worked their way across this country, he by building the railroads, and she as a seamstress and a cook. And I found in the Chicago Street Directory for 1856 and 57 over there, Jeremiah and Ellen and all of their children, except my grandfather Will, are listed. From Uncle Bob, here on my left, we have previously learned that Grandpa Jeremiah bought his farm of 40 acres on the Archie Road, as he called it, in the Bridgeport section of Chicago for 10 cents an acre. And he later sold it for $4, since he was talked like an Irishman, he couldn't say dollar. Bob heard this from his father. I also obtained a copy of the 1860 federal census, which is behind Cousin James over there. And it lists Jeremiah and Ellen. And Jeremiah is listed as a farm laborer, but we also know he was a blacksmith and that he and his sons helped build the canals in Chicago. Uncle Bob tells a story he heard from his father, Will, that when Jeremiah hauled hay, took a load of hay to the Haymarket in Chicago, he hauled it on a log highway and had to load the hay 3 times before he got it finally delivered. The young Lyons family's net worth of real estate in 1860 was listed as $500 and his personal worth as $50. And I'm happy to note that on that census form for 1860, there were no check marks in the columns for paupers or convicts. But I did not check later census results. From Jeremiah's grandson, Tom, we have learned that Jeremiah was a friend, admirer, and supporter of Stephen A. Douglas, particularly in the presidential campaign of 1860. And it was certainly not the last time Lyons supported a rather unsuccessful candidate for elected office. Most of the Lyons family left for Iowa 9 years before Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over that lantern, causing the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. In the early 1880s, Richard Lyons led a wagon train of Irish settlers to Lake County, Dakota Territory near Madison, along with his brothers and sisters and others, at a time when the entire country faced west. And in their retirement, Jeremiah and Ellen joined their sons and daughters in South Dakota, in the newly formed state of South Dakota. And so it's from those first Dakotans that our Lyons experience and all of us have been begotten. Well, now that's enough of an introduction. Now, many words will flow from Lyons' lips this afternoon, and there may perhaps be some truth mixed up with them. It is up to you to seek out the truth and to decide whether any part of it is worth keeping. But I would like to call upon a few folk, knowing that a good piece of family gossip can march halfway around the county before the truth can get its boots on. And I'm sure a few of their stories today will possess enough promise to make this whole reunion worthwhile. But you should know that each person who will speak here this afternoon has been advised that they and the stories they tell must pass the same test my grandfather Will applied at every horse auction. He was a great horse trader. And that judgment is, they must be sound in wind and limb and free from all blemish of every character. Well, first I would like to acknowledge our Uncle Bob Lyons of Wagner. He is our last grandson of Jeremiah and Ellen. Bob is our vital connection to that senior generation of Lyons pioneers. He's also the Democratic boss of Charles Mex County, served in the state legislature for many years. And it has been from him that many of our family stories and traditions have been passed along. Did you ever consider if it wasn't for 800 years of history with England and a few bad potato crops, we would be gathering in Waterford today? And Uncle Bob would be joining us as the distinguished former member of the Irish Parliament. And the portrait of Richard Lyons, which now hangs in the City Council Chamber of Vermilion, would be hung in the Chamber of Mayors of Waterford County. And our stories would be told in our native tongue, Irish. Now, as an alternative to Bob's usual storytelling, and with his endorsement, my cousin John Robinson is going to read a selection from Cousin Tom's essays on the first Lyons politicians in Dakota. John Robinson is approaching the podium, and he might have a few remarks, and then he can share with us this little story.
Well, I don't really have any remarks except that below the microphone. The only thing is that it's a pleasure to be here. I didn't make the last one, and it's just nice to be back and to see all my cousins, which I haven't seen. I think the last time was here at the Lyons farm many years ago. So let's begin. It starts out, and this is, of course, me doing the reading, not doing the telling. When my father brought the wagon train from Burr Oak, Iowa, to Prairie Queens, Dakota Territory in the 70s, he had a letter in his pocket from the vice president of the Milwaukee Railroad to a Mr. R.F. Pettigrew, attorney at law, Sioux Falls, Dakota Territory. When we met Mr. Pettigrew, he said, "Mr. Lyons, what is the politics of the members of your wagon company? I observe a great many Irish names on the list, and I have been wondering if you have any Democrats in the crowd." Mr. Pettigrew was, even then, before he was 30 years old, spoken as a Republican boss of the Dakota Territory. My father answered, "Well, Mr. Pettigrew, I am bound to be candid with you. We did have one Republican in the crowd when we left Burr Oak. But the boys found out about it and dropped him into the Big Sioux at Laverne. I never heard whether he managed to swim back to Minnesota shore or went on to Sioux City." Pettigrew got a good laugh out of this, but said, "Well, I'm glad that your crowd are Democrats. You may be interested in knowing that we haven't got any Democrats in the Dakota Territory, and a good many people think we don't need it. But my observation is that you never know what the future holds, and of course that day may come when we need Democrats in Dakota." This was the beginning of a friendship that ended only with the senator's life. In 1908, my father was state chairman, and in January 1909, Senator Pettigrew invited him and his friends to have breakfast with William Jennings Bryan at the senator's stock farm near Sioux Falls. Cake, sausage, and maple syrup constituted the principal dish. At each man's plate, there was a fine big water glass of golden maple syrup. The Dakota pioneers each had a glass full of the senator's celebrated bourbon, however. At the end of the breakfast, Senator Pettigrew, blunt in speech, said, "Bryan, in 1898, we all thought you were going to win the presidency. And maybe you did. It just didn't happen to come out right because you didn't have the right people counting the vote. In 1900, of course, we had no show. But this time, Dick Lyons and I were both badly fooled. Tell us just how the hell it feels to get the stuffing beat out of you 3 times for the presidency." The great commoner met the situation nobly. He said, "Senator Pettigrew and my pioneer Dakota friends, let me answer this statement by quoting your own Dakota proverb. When a man sleeps on the ground, he has no danger of falling out of bed."
Well, actually, I just had the occasion with my wife to visit the Pettigrew Museum in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. My nephew Will and Jane took us there. And you would find it of great interest if you did visit that museum. And from what we know, he in fact was a lifelong and close friend of the Lyons family. Well, next I would like to introduce my mother, Mary Donahue Lyons. She has been associated with the Lyons family since the flapper period in the 1920s. And if my mother were a tree standing firm among the cottonwoods, it would be seen that someone had carved 93 annual rings about her, forging time's signature upon her trunk, and making it seem as if she were growing not older, but wiser. My mother applies to herself the same principle she uses on her 1964 Dodge Dart, which she still has. Better to wear out than rust out. The car has only 55,000 miles on it, but my mother's odometer has turned over many times.
I don't believe quite all he said, but we'll let it go. Greetings.